From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
With COVID, we were kind of all in this together. This was an international health pandemic. The world was being affected. Every state in the country was being affected, and the federal government was helping us tremendously. That's very different than what we're facing right now. What we're facing right now is the federal government is doing this to us, is not helping us in any way, and we are more acutely affected here in the DMV than anywhere else in the country.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. If you serve your community in any leadership role, you already know the work asks a lot of you. The responsibility is real, expectations are high, and the path forward is rarely simple. This podcast exists for those moments. It's a place to slow down, to reflect with openness, and to learn from leaders who are navigating complexity while the stakes are still very real. Today's episode is part of a monthly series sponsored by RELI, the Regional Elected Leaders Initiative at George Mason University's Schar School of Policy and Government. RELI connects and supports regional leaders across Northern Virginia, helping them take on complex challenges through collaboration and shared learning. By sponsoring this series, RELI is sharing those insights with local leaders everywhere, and we are really grateful for their partnership. Our guest today is Jeffrey McKay, chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. With 1.2 million residents, Fairfax is the largest county in Virginia. As always in county government, the needs of residents, the health of the regional economy, and the work of government naturally intersect. And right now, all across Northern Virginia, those needs are colliding under extraordinary pressure, caused by federal budget cuts, workforce reductions, and all sorts of ripple effects, making this a particularly timely conversation. Chairman Jeffrey McKay, it's good to meet you, and welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to be with you.
Mr. Chairman, you have been part of Fairfax County's leadership, as I counted, for nearly 3 decades, first in senior staff roles, then elected to the Board of Supervisors in 2007, and you've been serving as chairman since 2019. You have a rare, long view of how your community has navigated pressure over time. Do I got the timeline right for you?
You do have it right, and you're correct. Certainly been through a lot and have a lot of perspectives. I've lived in Fairfax County my entire life, and so this is also where I grew up, and so obviously that shapes a lot of my mind about where we are now and where we're going in the future, and certainly have been through a lot.
So let's get into it. How does this moment compare to others that you've lived through, that you've experienced? What feels most different, most demanding about holding all of these responsibilities together at the same time?
Well, obviously, these are unprecedented times, as you mentioned in the intro, and I think the impacts of what's happening at the federal level are extraordinary. Those are the things that keep me up at night. I can remember chairing our county board through the peak of the COVID pandemic. And, I have compared what's happening at the federal level very similarly to what we went through during COVID, from the standpoint of not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring, from the standpoint of the ripple effects of what's happening run deep. And so a lot of times we talk about, cuts at the federal government level in terms of federal employees, but obviously what we're monitoring is the effects on our overall economy. And it is, of course, federal employees, but it's also civilian contractors, small business owners, families that are making decisions to not make investments that have an underlying effect on our economy. There's just a lot of ripple effects here. And of course, dealing with all the other federal issues that come up outside of just the federal cuts. It means, I think most of us in local government wake up every day and we really don't know what we're going to be looking at from a day-to-day standpoint. And so at this moment, that unrest is causing significant challenges for us. And the good news of this is it is forcing us to think about things a little bit differently. And so there's obviously a little we can do about what's happening at the federal level, but a lot we can do about, how we respond to it and what our future looks like, and preparing our economy for days in the future that aren't going to look like the days of the past.
Let's talk about the kind of the practical implications of what's going on in Fairfax County right now. You've got individuals and households that are affected. You've got the economy as a whole. The county obviously has, its governance and its budget that is controlling. And you've got regional level issues that you still have to coordinate. Am I missing something in that equation? Is there some other altitude that you're also thinking about on a regular basis?
I think you have the gist of it. I think the individual issues, when we talk about what we're dealing with, the individual issues are long list of things because, we can talk about the economy, but then we also need to talk about, so many things that are affecting people that are indirectly related to that. I mean, at the federal government level, we have philosophical changes being pushed across the finish line with little debate that trickle down to local government in terms of implementation. Even simple things like, do you sign agreements about immigration enforcement when you apply for a public safety grant? Do you agree to certain federal requirements right now that run that are contrarian to the philosophical views of you and your county? And so there are things we're dealing with every single day that aren't directly related to the economy, but are directly related to county operations and absolutely will affect our residents. And so there's been a lot of discussion, good, about the economic impacts, but some of the social impacts of what's happening haven't really gotten as much attention and ink and are things we're working on. Things like, reductions to SNAP benefits. Well, what does that mean for a family that's struggling to put food on the table? What does that mean for our public health network if people don't have access to healthy foods? What does that mean for their children? And can their children go to school and are they performing at the level they need to based on whether they have a healthy diet or food at all? And so that just the trickle down effects of these things are running deep. And those are the things that we're looking at on a daily basis. And so I would say that's the one piece that's missing. This is not just about the economy. It's about the overall health of our community. It's about how you settle clashes and philosophies between your county government, in my case, Fairfax, and what the federal government is doing. And it's also a little bit about, what level of risk are you going to take? Because obviously federal funding is an important piece of the puzzle for what makes our community work. But what are you willing to sign on to or agree to in order to make that federal funding happen? And those are the philosophical debates that I know are taking place in county governments across the country on a daily basis.
Do those feel like solvable problems at this point, or do they actually feel insurmountable because there is not just a clash of policy, but a clash of values?
I think they're solvable. I mean, I come from a philosophical background that's very pragmatic. And so, I know what I need to exchange to minimize the impact on my county residents. I know what risks are worth taking and which are philosophically not worth taking. And so, it doesn't make it easy. I think they're solvable. I look at this as, what's happening at the federal level is tied to an administration that has a 4-year term. We're 1 year finished. We've got 3 years to go. And so I'm thinking about, well, what are the long-term and the short-term things and what exchanges need to be made to try to minimize the impact on the people that I represent? And so I do think they're solvable, but I think they have to be looked at individually. And those are the types of weights and checks and balances you need to have in place.
This is a question that has come up with everyone else I've interviewed in Northern Virginia on this. Is the situation that we have a function of short-term turbulence that we just need to get through, or is this the new normal? Is it ever going to go back to the way it was? Do you have a sense of that?
I think it's both. There will be normalization of things after this administration is over. But I'm also fully aware of the fact that some of the damage that's happening is going to be much more long-term. And so one of the things, it's a great question because one of the things we've been focused on is we're trying to resist some of the federal government cuts. And, I played a large role in doing that. I was not able to persuade our governor at the time to engage in that, which I wish we had, because Virginia is more affected than any other state in the country by just about every measure. And so the impact on us is going to be the greatest. And so we're at this point now where the realization of my concerns has happened. And we're seeing, unemployment sky high. We're seeing, tens of thousands of people looking for jobs. We're seeing the number of available jobs shrink dramatically as federal contracts and other things shrink. And so I think, right now what we're focused on is how do we build an economy around other things in addition to federal spending, because not only will that help us in the short term, that's going to help us in the long term, because even when the normalization of some of these things happen, it's not going to be in a year. A 4-year philosophical attack on the federal government and its resources does not get solved in 1 year. Right. And I do think we're in this for the long run. I do think there's some short-term things, though, that will immediately reverse. For example, some of the tension that exists between local law enforcement and federal immigration enforcement. I do think that's the type of thing that in a new administration on day one, that goes away. But I think the ripple effects on the economy and what you do in a region like the DMV that's so heavily dependent upon federal spending, many of those things are going to be long-term adjustments that have to be made.
When you say invest in other things, are you talking about economic development for the county that doesn't depend on the federal government?
Yeah, we're seeing great growth in some new areas. AI is obviously one of them, where we've seen tremendous new job growth in the county. Aerospace, quantum computing. We recently had a Congress, a major conference on quantum computing happen in Tyson's Corner that brought people from all over the world together. And this is a big growth area that is incubating itself here in Fairfax County with some of our technology companies that doesn't rely on the federal government. And so, looking at those spaces where you can have economic growth that doesn't depend on federal dollars, certainly in the area of healthcare, that's one that, we're seeing huge growth in that is not necessarily tied directly to federal spending. And so making sure that our Economic Development Authority is promoting those industries that grow jobs in our region and grow jobs in Fairfax County that are not federal government dependent is what we're, working on day and night. And we're seeing great success in those areas. I mean, as we sit here, today, we know that the number of available jobs in Northern Virginia has shrunk dramatically under this administration. But what we still know is there's still over 20,000 open jobs listed as of today. And many of them are in the fields that I just mentioned. And so there are companies and businesses throughout Fairfax County that are hiring right now. And those skill sets in those areas I just mentioned are a huge growth area that, again, are going to grow regardless of the federal government. And that's why we're so interested in promoting them.
If we could go back in time, 10 years, could you have even imagined 10 years ago? I mean, I imagine that economic development would certainly still have been on the county's agenda, but economic development to replace a substantial amount of federal government economic impact on the community would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, right?
It sure would have been. I mean, nobody could have predicted this happening. And that's why I think the question you asked last is a really intriguing one, which is, is this permanent or is this short term? And I think the reason I answered both is we have seen reductions in the federal government workforce that affect our economy here. But what we're also hearing is how it's affecting service delivery across the country. And I think we've cut too far. We've lost a lot of expertise. And I think there's a lot of members of Congress from all over the country whose constituents are being affected by delivery systems in the federal government that have been significantly weakened. And they're not going to stand for that. And so I do think that we've gone too far. But I do think there's no way for us to have predicted this because we've never seen anything like this before. I think the good news story out of this, for us at least, for us in Fairfax, and I think to a larger extent for the DMV more holistically, is that we have such a strong business infrastructure that has already been established here that they too are pivoting in what they're doing at the same time we're trying to pivot to attract these new industries. For example, talking to some of our defense contractors, they're doing particularly well in this environment because they're not really affected. But some of our other federal government contractors are thinking about, do we want to get involved in defense type, fields? Do we want to expand what we're doing to kind of follow the federal money? And so the good news for us is we have many of those businesses. We know what the numbers look like embedded in our economy already. They're not going to settle for just losing revenue. They're going to pivot just like we are to try to find that money and chase it. And they're already doing that. And so I think to a certain extent, that can salvage some of the pain that's happening here. And the private sector community is spry in doing that as we are in trying to help promote those things.
Earlier you mentioned the COVID pandemic and the response to it. And of course, that was unprecedented in our experience, and this is unprecedented now. But I have to say, when I reflect on COVID, as disruptive as it was, I don't know that we ever had the sense that COVID was going to be a permanent situation that was going to last. We didn't know how long it would last, and we didn't know how devastating it would be. There were a lot of unknowns, but we were at least all on the side of, if we can get through this, there is another side to it.
Yeah.
In this current situation, there is, as you say, a lot of pivoting going on, which makes me wonder, from your perspective, does it feel like you're stuck playing defense because there's so many needs and so many challenges being thrown at you? Or can you, and I mean you and the Board of Supervisors as a whole, do you actually in this moment feel like you can actually be strategic and that the pivot actually is purposeful and mindful and orienting to the future that you can control rather than just responding to things being thrown at you?
Well, it's both, right? I mean, I spend days, I joked with my kids that sometimes my days feel like I'm playing that old arcade game Whack-A-Mole where, things pop up and you're constantly just popping them back down. And so there are short-term things like that come up. And then there are long-term things that, obviously we can be a lot more strategic about. And so I feel like my role is, one, protect my constituents from what's happening that negatively could affect their lives. And at the same time, be strategic and recognize that we're moving into a new era, that there's been a massive economic shift that we need to be mindful of. But going back to, the beginning premise of your question, I do think there's a really big, important distinction between what we were dealing with during COVID and what we're dealing with right now. And that distinction is, with COVID, we were kind of all in this together. This was an international health pandemic. The world was being affected. Every state in the country was being affected. And the federal government was helping us tremendously. That's very different than what we're facing right now. What we're facing right now is the federal government is doing this to us, is not helping us in any way. And we are more acutely affected here in the DMV than anywhere else in the country. And so we don't have kind of the whole country pulling for us. We don't have the federal government pulling for us. We kind of are in an island where we are most impacted with the impact coming deliberately, not accidentally, but deliberately. And I think we need to reckon with that, because as I tell, my constituents, counties are affected in so many ways. We've talked about some of them on this podcast, but let's think about this. We are, our economy is being affected. Our people are losing jobs. The county is not getting grant money that it otherwise would have gotten, which has an economic impact. And then as businesses, and other things, other entities in our community restrict their spending, that affects the county budget. And so we also were affected by inflationary costs like everybody else. And so our costs are sky high. The lines of people who need assistance because they've lost jobs or lost, their ability to pay their rent is long, and the federal money is short. And so it's very different than what we had during COVID. We had massive federal resources to stabilize families and help them get through this. And right now we don't have that. And so I just, people need to make sure they understand all of those moving pieces to fully understand the challenges that localities are facing right now.
As we were preparing for today, I asked if you would share a leadership experience from early in your journey that really stuck with you. And you told me about something called the One Fairfax equity policy. And And I understand it was an inclusive process. Could I ask you to talk about that? What was the project, and what's the lingering impact on that for you as a leader?
Yeah, so to me, this is the most important thing I've been involved in all of my years, not just because of the success of the policy, but more because long term, this is a policy that will affect thousands of people that I will never meet in my life, and that makes me feel really good. And so, where this began, we go back way back in time, and just say that I mentioned earlier, I've lived in the county my entire life. Well, I grew up on the Richmond Highway corridor, which is known very well in the county as being one of the parts of the county that has the most significant economic challenges, some disparate health outcomes, is tremendously diverse, but a lot of folks living in poverty. And my parents deliberately wanted to live in that part of the county so that I could grow up in a multicultural community. I went to majority minority schools, but when I went away to college and came back to the county and met, friends from all over Fairfax and all over the region, I quickly realized that part of the county looked a lot different than other parts of the county and didn't have a lot of the resources that exist in other parts of the county, didn't have access to green space, didn't have some of the pedestrian and environmental assets that some of the other parts of the county had, didn't have the type of jobs, didn't have the type of development that I saw in other parts of the county. And it really inspired me first to run for office, because to me, we need to be serving all of our constituents without regard to zip code. And frankly, we should be striving to make sure opportunities exist in every corner of the county. And too often people are born into a certain zip code and it changes their entire life trajectory. And it's not because they're not hardworking, determined individuals. It's because access to opportunity just didn't exist for them. And they get in a cycle of institutional and generational poverty, which helps nobody. And so when this erupted, there was a meeting at our Board of Supervisors where the school board budget was being discussed. And this was quite some time ago. So this is not the current school board or the current board. And Supervisor Hudgens and I at the time, she represented Hunter Mill District. I represented Franconia, two very different parts of the county, very far apart from each other. We're incensed in what we were hearing because in essence, the schools were proposing to defund a lot of programs that go to Title I schools. But we didn't see any of the defunding happening in programs that, were available for GT students or only serve certain corners of the county. And we got pretty incensed about that because we fundamentally believe public education is to lift all kids up, not just some kids, but all kids. And that should be the philosophy behind the budget. And so we erupted at a board meeting over this, and it led to a committee looking at successful children and youth. And in that committee, in one of the first meetings, we said, look, we don't want more programs for people. What we want is to get to the root causes about why outcomes in certain areas of the county are dramatically different than outcomes in other areas of the county. Why do we have these islands of disadvantage, and what can we do to try to level the playing field in those areas? And so we did a root cause analysis. We partnered with some institutional and academic groups to kind of rip off a Band-Aid and say, let's get to what the root is. And in doing that, we had a very deliberate conversation about race, about inequity, about social justice, about intentionality of decisions that are made at the local government level that continue to double down on our country's history of holding certain races and people back. And it was a hard conversation, I'll be honest with you. To have that conversation in Fairfax County, not the easiest thing in the world. But ultimately, we passed a resolution that said we were going to look at racial inequities as an intentional process in setting county policies. And there's much more to it than that, but that was the essence of it. And we asked the school board to pass an identical resolution because we thought it was very important that the schools and county government be on the same page with this. And we passed that resolution, later came back as a policy that we put in place. And I can tell you that one of the reasons it's so powerful to me is right after we put it in place, there were two instances where having this policy changed trajectories. One was, we had typically in the background, we would put bus stops out where we had right of way or, thought it worked on the route. We didn't really look at what population are we serving and why. And when we put that policy in place, we put a bus stop in the entrance to a neighborhood on the Route 1 corridor that wasn't there before. And later, there was a lady who said to me, I don't know why you guys put that bus stop there, but thank God you did, because it changed my life. I now have access to a better job. I get home from work earlier because I get paid more. I help my kids with their homework. They're doing better in school. In the past, we would just say, well, we have right away there, plop a bus stop down. Now we're looking at, well, what communities are we serving and how can we help them? The second one was we had a domestic violence shelter in the western part of the county for my entire life. That was the domestic violence shelter. So if you were a victim of domestic violence in Alexandria, not only is your entire life upended, but now you geographically, to go to that shelter, have to pull your kids out of their school and yourself out of your community and go all the way out to the western part of the county. And when we looked at that under our One Fairfax policy, we said that is absurd. We need to have a domestic violence shelter in the southeastern end of the county as well. And we established one in Franconia district, in my district. I had been working and fighting to get one of those for 10 years. And only after we put this policy in place did the rest of the board have to look at that and say, it is inequitable and unfair that we have this in one part of the county and not another part of the county. How can we not act on this? And so those are two examples where I know people's lives have been fundamentally changed. And by the way, we were way ahead of the rest of the country on this issue. This was not in reaction to the last Trump administration, as some people think. We put this in place well before that. We were having these conversations about race and inequity well before the George Floyd incident, because we just know that economically and morally, these things are worth discussing, because we can't keep repeating the same mistakes we've made in the past and expect better outcomes. And so to me, this has been a very powerful thing.
So what was the time frame in which the policy was created and established?
Well, it took us years because, we started these conversations. Like I said, we could have done it quicker if our effort was to just create policies that created, equity. But instead, we said, we don't just want to do that. We want to fundamentally change the way we look at every decision we make in the county, every single one.
It sounds like a values upgrade that was installed for the county and for the school board as well. And that's what I'm really interested in this, which was going into, I still don't have a sense of what years this was discussed and when it was actually executed. But what I'm really interested in is this wasn't just what affected you and your personal quality of leadership. This was the installation of a set of values that you hoped and expected and apparently has been institutionalized all across the county.
It was. And just to put a timeline on it, we passed the resolution in 2016. So it wasn't like it was yesterday. And we had been working on it for years before that resolution passed in 2016. So we've been at this for a while. And I would say it is a values upgrade, but I would also say, it's a moment of reflection for our entire community. Because one of the many complaints about it at the time, I got a lot of complaints about it. I don't want to act like this was an easy thing. One of the reasons it took a long time.
Complaints from residents or who?
From residents, from, one of my colleagues at the time who, felt like it sounded to them like we were taking something from someone and giving it to someone else. And that's not at all what this was. In fact, it's completely the opposite of that saying, where we have areas of tremendous success in the county. What are we doing there that works so well? And how can we replicate that in other parts of the county? So it was never about taking from one to give to another. And that's a very deliberate, divisive way to try to defeat something like this based on fear. And so we were absolutely dealing with that at the time. And then the other thing we were dealing with is, well, let's see some metrics on, whether this is succeeding or not. And, at the very early stages, you can't show metrics to show that this is working. You just have to know that morally and economically, it's the right decision to make. Now that we've had this in place for a lot of years, we can very clearly point to metrics that have improved outcomes, improved quality of lives, and help the economy. And so, this notion of we're not all advancing unless we're all advancing comes to mind, because for people who have never heard of One Fairfax, let's say you're a person who lives in a very affluent part of the county, you may not care about this. but it is in your interest that people in another part of the county are performing at their maximum highest level, because you want them to be doing better in schools because that improves the reputation of FCPS. You want them to have access to good jobs because that might mean less services they need that come out of the same budget that you're paying into with your real estate taxes. And so, there is absolutely a vested reason for everyone in the county to embrace this notion, and there's an economic and a moral reason for it. And so I would say it's a moral upgrade, but it's also an economic upgrade. If we can give people the tools that they need to be more successful economically, then that helps the county's bottom line. And I think that's a piece of this that's been lost in the conversation.
If a local leader somewhere else in the country is listening to this conversation right now and says, boy, that's really interesting, I wonder what that would look like and how we would do that here. First off, is that a policy that people can find somewhere on your website? Can I link to it in the show notes so people can find it?
Absolutely.
And is there a case study written about this, or do you have some advice for local leaders elsewhere for how they might take their communities through a similar kind of process?
Yeah, well, first, it is all available on our website, the policy, a lot of things that are working towards the policy. We have a chief equity officer in the county who enforces it and oversees it. There have been case studies across the country that have shown where policies like this have been effective in helping move the needle, not just on racial inequality, but on some of the metrics local governments look at. But I would say this to any local government official listening: don't be afraid to have this conversation because, despite all the negativity, we have used this policy so often to help us solve everyday problems in our county. It is an asset to us. It has never been a liability. It has only been an asset. And if you're a decision maker at local government level, why would you not want to intentionally look at the social impacts of every decision that you make, even ones that you might not think have a social impact? I use the bus stop example. I can tell you that most local government officials are not thinking about where they put a sign is going to have a huge effect on the trajectory and the economic opportunities that families in their community have. They're just looking at it from a pure transit operations standpoint and mechanics. And I'm telling you, if you look back at those decisions with intentionality and look at who's being affected by every one of those decisions, you make better decisions. And that helps your overall community. But it's not easy. You cannot have a discussion about these issues without facing the raw facts of what our history has done, and without facing the real reality that we have institutions in place that have to be dismantled if you are to get to a pure path towards a more equitable future, because we have systems that have been set up that have been deliberately steered towards holding certain segments of our population back. And that's a deep part of our history that we have to overcome. And only through adult conversations about those things do I think you can move the needle. And so be prepared for that, but don't be afraid to do it, because ultimately at the end, you end up with a much better product and policy that can help everyone in your community, including the bottom line of your jurisdiction.
I'm going to ask you for some hard-won experience on this. Do you have 2 or 3 quick do's or don'ts for local leaders who might want to go down this path and explore doing this in their communities?
Do partner because you cannot do it alone. In my case, I did it with a member of our board who had experience in this area, just like I did. So do partner with someone. Do make sure that you prepare your community for having the hard conversations. Don't relent to fear, because it always brings about fear. Whenever you talk about race, automatically people get into a fearful mode, and you have to overcome that as a community, and then celebrate your successes, because you don't want to just put a policy in place and then walk away from it. Too often that happens. This is a living, breathing document in the county. And when we have successes related to intentionally looking at this policy that yields a better outcome, we celebrate those successes. So do celebrate those.
I have a couple of really practical questions I want to ask you. It's rare that I get to talk to someone who is an elected leader whose background was as a senior staff person in the same body that they worked. And one of the questions that I get asked frequently when I'm traveling around the country as a speaker and as I'm working with city councils and county boards and the like is understanding the fundamental difference between the responsibilities of those who are staff and those who are elected. And my little shorthand for this is what I usually say is that electeds own the questions that begin with what? What are the long-term outcomes that we want our community to reach? But the staff under a county manager or a city manager or a school superintendent, they're responsible for the how questions. How do we do that? How do we budget for it and the like? And that this is a line that's not supposed to be crossed. And I'm wondering how you explain the difference between the staff and the elected function and whether your background as a staff person either was an advantage for you or ever if it proved to be a challenge to not want to overstep to the role of the staff.
I think it's been a huge advantage for me. First, this is a very large, sophisticated county. So understanding its operations for me on day one has been hugely beneficial to me. I look at it very similarly to the way you described. I would just add a couple things. One, you don't know what it feels like to be an elected official until you are one. And it's very different than you thought. Because the spotlight elected officials are under is very different than the spotlight that staff is under. And so you have to make an adjustment, and that's a big adjustment. The other thing that I learned early on is that while elected officials and leaders of boards come and go, staff is usually here for the long haul. They will always do what the elected board tells them to do. However, the speed at which they do that and the interest in which they have succeeding at that can be very different. And so you have to respect the staff and the professionals. I see too often elected officials who, have a disagreement with staff and go after the staff. I look at it very differently. The staff is your partner. They are the professionals who were here before you got here. They will be the professionals here likely after you leave. And they have a very professional role to do. And so you have to be partners with them to be able to get things done. And I think a lot of times elected officials to see their role as coming in and just telling the staff what to do. And to me, it is cooperating with the staff to get done what I need to get done. And so before I make a declaration of this is what we're going to do, we spend time with the staff understanding what is their perspective, what is their professional perspective, what are the pros and cons of this. They know these issues better than I do. And they help me shape a policy that then they're excited about implementing once we announce it. A good example is our goal of 10,000 affordable housing units in Fairfax County. I didn't just make that number up. We sat down with the staff deliberately and said, what is in the realm of doable? Do we have the resources to do it? What new tools do we need to accomplish this? Let's do this together. Sure, I'm going to be the one that announces it and the board's going to be the one who adopts it, but that's meaningless if the horsepower with the staff isn't behind you to be able to get that done. And so we need to be thinking more about partnering more than just always directing.
That's a great answer. Another practical question I have for you is, we're talking in the latter part of the month of January. This episode will air or will publish at the very end of February. But Virginia, as of about a week or so ago, has a new governor in Abigail Spanberger. And I'm curious whether you already know her, have an established relationship, and if not, from your position as a county board chair, how do you develop a relationship? How important is it to develop a relationship with a new governor?
Well, I do have a relationship with her. We had early conversations when she was announcing her running, where I got to know her. We had a couple opportunities to work with her when she was on Capitol Hill on some bills and some things that the county supported. So I kind of knew her cursory then, but really got to know her when she was contemplating running for governor, because she reached out to a lot of elected officials to get their advice and support, which she had from me. The other interesting thing about our governor that she shared with me that most people didn't know is during her time working for the CIA, she lived in Fairfax County and she lived on the Route 1 corridor, not far from where I grew up. And so we had a personal connection where she knew a lot about this county just because of the years she lived here when she was working for the federal government. To answer your question, it is essential to have a relationship with the governor at a local government level, because obviously So many things happen at the state level that affect us, but not always is the governor aware of what those effects are in local government. And so being able to pick up the phone and call and have that conversation is so powerful. And it's not meant to be, an instance of just disagreement. It's meant to be an instance of understand our perspective. And this governor has shown a total willingness to hear from and appreciate the hard work that local government puts into the work that they do. And so I am excited about that. I'll be candid with you and tell you that we had some real challenges working with the last administration on a lot of things. Everything from law enforcement to fighting back what was happening at the federal level that was decimating our economy. We didn't have a lot of cooperation with that. We didn't have tremendous cooperation on economic development, even though over the last 3 years, 1 out of every 2 jobs created in Virginia was created in Fairfax County. And so, we need to have a partnership where a governor is celebrating our success, working with us to understand what the impacts are of policies before making declarations, and being supportive, in my mind, of the hard work of local government. I'm excited about that prospect with this governor and the early willingness she's shown to do that.
What's your advice for other county chairs or mayors or school board chairs if they have a new governor or another senior leader in their community? How should they go about introducing themselves if they haven't already had that relationship?
Well, I think that's important. I mean, one of the things that we do is, we have the Virginia Association of Counties. We have the Virginia Municipal League. They sponsor a lot of forums with the governor where local elected officials can get to know them. So there's those institutional things in place that local government leaders should take advantage of to interact. But the other thing is on the personal level, if you can't, for some reason, get before the governor and have that conversation, think about your General Assembly delegation, because they're obviously working with the governor a lot. And maybe your state senator or state delegate can partner with you and set up an opportunity to get to meet the governor or the governor's administration. One of the things is there's obviously a lot of focus on Abigail and wanting to meet her, but she has stood up a phenomenal cabinet of professionals already that we have seen that are very accessible. And as a local government official, we should be spending a lot of time with. As an example, metro funding is a huge issue for the DMV. So I'm spending a lot of time talking to Nick Donahue, who worked on that, but now is also the Secretary of Transportation, has a direct line to the governor. And so think about the issues that are important to your jurisdiction. Maybe start with setting up a meeting with the cabinet director, who works on those issues that are so important to your jurisdiction, and use that as a way also to build a relationship.
Final question for you, and we only have 2 minutes left. Regional collaboration in Northern Virginia is different than almost any other place around the country. The level of overlap and connection and mutual dependencies that exist has been incredible. And again, thanks to the Relly sponsorship, we've had some really interesting insights into how all that works. And I am just curious, from your perspective, what makes regional collaboration work? What is it about Northern Virginia that has that's made it so effective for communities to work well together?
Yeah, well, let me start by saying it hasn't always been that way. And I would say over the last 10 years or so, we have seen tremendous cooperation on so many things. And before that, a lot of times localities were pitted against each other. And we've realized that's not in our long-term success. The other benefit that we have is we have so many of our constituents that live and work in different places, and they don't care where they are. They need their transit to work. They want the roads to talk to each other. They want our region to work because they are traveling through multiple jurisdictions different than the ones they live or work in. And so we have to factor in that, that's the way our economy works here. And so there is an expectation and a demand, rightfully, that we work together. And so I think professionally, this helps us in so many ways. And we can think of high profile incidents, whether let's just think about 9/11 or January 6th, just being able to watch the way our law enforcement backfilled each other through our mutual aid agreements in a seamless way is a great success story for why regionalism matters. And that's just one example of 1,000 where everyone benefits from that. And so from a professional standpoint, that makes sense. From a personal standpoint, our economy is big enough that we should not be seen as competitors. And so when big things like Amazon come to our region, we're interested in having that in Northern Virginia. Sure, we would like to have it in your own jurisdiction, but frankly, Alexandria City getting awarded that is a huge benefit to the southeastern end of Fairfax County. And so we were collaborating with them, not being seen as enemies of each other, but how do we get this in Northern Virginia? Because a lot of the jobs that come with this are going to be for people in Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William, all those other jurisdictions. And so I think we get it. The last thing I will say is we have so many large challenges that cannot be solved by jurisdictions, and we realize that. I mentioned our 10,000 housing goal. Well, affordable housing is a nationwide problem, certainly a regional problem in the DMV. And unless all of our jurisdictions are addressing affordable housing, it won't matter if one is. And so we're in lockstep on that issue. When it comes to Metro, we all benefit from Metro, so we all need to support it. So there are big things like that that require all of our attention and all of our support because they affect everyone in our region, not just the people in our own narrow jurisdiction that we're fighting for every day. And so, regionalism has to be not just an important principle, but practically speaking, it is applied in so many ways that people don't realize that we need to continue to enhance and support moving forward. And in tough times like we're facing right now with the federal government, there's also a practical advantage to being in lockstep with each other as a region in addressing some of these challenges. When the first cuts to the federal government came out, we had, mayors and chairs calls a couple times a week talking about what we were doing, what is best practice, how are you handling this, how can we work together, how can we do regional job fairs, full on complete cooperation. Good, important in good times, essential in challenging times.
Chairman Jeffrey McKay, it's been great talking to you, and I thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Matt. I've enjoyed this.
My thanks again to Chairman Jeffrey McKay of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors in Virginia. Listening to the chairman, what stays with me is how clearly he demonstrates that leadership operates at multiple altitudes all at once, from the lived experience of individuals and households to the health of the local community to the responsibilities of the county as an organization, and then in coordination with neighboring jurisdictions and regional systems like transportation. This conversation is a reminder that effective leadership isn't about choosing one level over another, but about understanding how they intersect and staying responsive across all of them. That kind of awareness, especially under pressure, is what helps communities hold together and move forward. And again, my thanks to RELI, the Regional Elected Leaders Initiative at the George Mason University Schar School of Policy and Government, for their sponsorship of this episode. Hey, if this conversation sparked an idea, raised a question, or got you thinking about your own leadership, I'd love to hear from you. You're welcome to call 602-688-2724 and leave me a short message. Tell me what you're noticing or what you'd like to hear explored next. I listen to every message, and your reflections genuinely help shape future episodes. And if you'd be open to sharing some of the hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, I invite you to apply as a guest. You'll find the podcast guest link in the show notes. Your story may help another leader see their own work a little more clearly. Community Catalysts is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.